Welcome to the apex of sports ownership, the Apex Athletic Collective.
Welcome in, everyone, to episode 69 of Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise. I am your host, as always, Jake Schoen, aka JD Muffins, here to break down the season so far, take a look at what we've got coming up tomorrow and throughout the rest of the season here. We are officially in December now, so we are in the final month of 2024. So once we hit that end of this year, we'll be about halfway through the season, and then we'll have the second half of our ABA season in 2025. So let's jump into this week's episode. Some of this will be a little bit of recap from last time. Kind of ran through some stuff. But again, I just wanted to thank everyone here for being a Patreon member. If you're watching this live, you are part of that Patreon family. Thank you for your support, and thank you for supporting the Hoosier State Instigators and the Apex Athletic Collective. We wouldn't be doing any of this without our fans. So we really appreciate that support. And we appreciate your input. If you're not already over on our Discord too, this is a good opportunity to mention that. You can jump onto our Discord as well, and you can interact with myself as well as some of the other co-owners of the Apex Athletic Collective. And you are always free to reach out to us, whether it be through the Discord, social media, or Patreon. And if you have any kind of ideas or any kind of ways you think we could improve, we are always open to that. And also, if you got some cool ideas, we're definitely down to hear that as well. But we always appreciate any kind of fan input and really appreciate all 125 plus of our Patreon members. So again, thank you for being part of our family here. And if you are watching this, when we post this over on YouTube, reminder, you can catch all these live as well as live game streams by becoming a paid Patreon member. So all those games that we play throughout the ABA season are available to live stream for all paid members of the Patreon. And there are different tiers of Patreon, or you can get added benefits. So if you're a fan voter, you have been able to vote for every week this season the final roster spot. We'll jump into this week's fans man in a little bit, but that is one of the big key benefits that we do have for our fan voters. Every week they do decide that, and then we also have votes up throughout the season, off season as well. Things such as our jerseys we had votes on this year, player evaluations, and things such as that nature. But that is just a little sneak peek as far as what you get for being a fan voter. We'll mention we also have a new podcast that we launched for our Patreon members. So I believe it's for the paid memberships, you will see that there is a new podcast. It's titled the HSI Hoosier State Instigators Deep Dive, and it's a recap of our games throughout the season, and it is hosted by two hosts, Claire and Jamie, who recap the games throughout the season. So this is something we are testing out. We have the AI camera. This is possibly a AI podcast as well. So we're testing that out. That's an exclusive feature for our Patreon members. So that is another thing to check out, an added feature for everyone that's a part of that. Again, I believe that's for any of the paid tiers. You do get access to that exclusive podcast as well. But tomorrow night, we will be streaming the game live from Peoria when we face off against the Pitbulls. I believe that game is going to be 4 p.m. Central, so 5 p.m. Eastern, if I'm not mistaken. So that is what we'll be looking forward to tomorrow. So all those paid Patreon subscribers, you'll be able to watch that game live, as such as myself. So we'll look forward to seeing that. And we'll jump into the recap of the season so far. So let's go back to our first game. We've got 5 games under our belt now. Just had our first bye week. This is it was the holiday weekend with Thanksgiving. So again, I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. And that was our bye week for the season. So I believe every other week we have games scheduled all the way through the first week in March. And then at that point, we'll be jumping into the playoff mode, and we'll keep track of that playoff bracket as the time gets closer. But we can at least see kind of where things stand at this point and look at the standings within our division, and recap the games so far for our team, as well as taking a look at some of the other teams in our division. Again, we are in the ABA for this second season. We are in a new division, so we're still in that central region, but we are in the black division. Last season, we were in the red division, so we'll also take a look at some of the common opponents we have throughout the season as well here. Jumping back to that first game, our first game was a home opener at our new home venue in Fishers, Indiana, the Best Choice Fieldhouse. If you haven't been out there, I highly recommend you go out there. We may have dropped a new commercial, where we promote that. So if you haven't seen that, it is in our latest game stream. I do know that for a fact, and I think we have it posted on some of our socials as well. But we also have a 3 and a 5 game package to save some money if you plan on going to more than just one Hoosier State Instigators home game. But that home opener was against the Louisville Pros, a familiar foe who we faced off against in our first season. And again, that game was presented by the Stites family, one of our wonderful sponsors. That was back in October, a couple months back. Instigators found themselves pulling off a 124-106 victory. This marked the first time in Instigators history that we had our home opener as a win and our season opener as a win, and the first time, if you go all the way back, to have a winning record in the ABA. So lots of things to be excited for at that point with the first game there for the Instigators. And the Pros were a team that we've seen every time we match up against, always a very physical team and a defensive oriented matchup for them. I think those are our lowest scoring games have typically been against the Louisville Pros. So that is always what we look for, is a hard defensive matchup between the two teams. Definitely always a back and forth matchup. They're the only team we faced off against in overtime as well. But they did have a better record against us last season. I think they wound up being 2-1 against us, if I'm not mistaken. So we got this victory and look to continue that role against them in the future. But that is a 124-106 victory. Again, always a tough physical matchup against the pros, and a team that was in our division last season. They're still in that division, the red division, but a familiar team that we got to match up against in our first game, again at that new home venue. So we got things kicking off the season to a hot start there, and really setting the tone for the Instigators. Again, we revamped our team here with the coaching side of things. So if you're not familiar with the coaching change, we did have. Corey, one of our co-owners, aka Frosty, he finished out the first season as our head coach, and now we have Coach Dobbs, who is our current head coach. She was announced in the offseason to take over as the new head coach for the Instigators. And we've seen her implement a couple of key things that have really helped stand out throughout these games is the different defenses that the Instigators have been able to implement. One of the things we saw last season was predominantly man-to-man defense. Now we've utilized both man-to-man as well as zone defenses, and especially pushing press like in the backcourt. Again, the 3D rule is super important in the ABA. So if you're able to create those turnovers in the backcourt, you have the opportunity to earn the additional point through the 3D rule. So that's some of the key features that we've seen. And then obviously our roster has changed over the season from season 1 to season 2. Do have some key players returning from last season, such as team captain Chuck Bloom, Dylan Ware, AB, and JoJo, as well as Joe Bird too. So those are some of the guys that returned, and then we have the rest of the roster is new players. So if you haven't been keeping up on that, we'll cover this week's roster here in a little bit and the fans man for this week. But the second game we got to play on the road. So we had the home game, then we went on the road against the Indiana Legends. Indiana Legends, an in-state rivalry, a friendly rivalry, I should add, against a common Indiana team. But when it comes to the final score, you see there 145-117. Bragging rights go to Hoosier State. So it is the Hoosier State, not Indiana, at least for the time being. But that's always a fun matchup with the in-state friendly rivalry there. And the legends we saw, continue to improve in this season, and they are, like us, where they're continuing to build their team as they go throughout the season. They're one of the newer teams too. So that is always a fun matchup, always a higher scoring matchup too. It does seem, at least for the Instigators in in these games. And we are currently undefeated against the Indiana Legends. So that is, another positive for any matchup that we have against the Legends. But you always got to take every game by game basis. Nothing's ever granted when it comes to that. So it's whoever gets on the court and wants it more is always going to be the team that walks away with that victory. But that set the Instigators on their, 2-0 streak to start the season. Again, we're still at that point, a winning record for the first time in history. And that got some more of the national attention from the ABA around the league. So after that first week's win, we jumped up for the first time in the power rankings. We were tied for 24th throughout the nation. And that was the first time we had ever been mentioned on a power rankings. Then, after this game, our second game of the season, we were 2-0. We were ranked number 16 in the nation. And that is the highest point for an Instigator's ranking as far as the ABA power rankings. in history, at least to that point. But that's a huge accomplishment throughout the season that we've been able to knock down to this point. And once you do that, it does put a target on your back, and that's something that the players, as well as fans and owners, do know that. Once you do get yourself up in those rankings, it does draw more attention, and obviously, teams are going to play with a little extra. Chip on their shoulder when it comes to those games against the ranked opponents. So that led to our next matchup, the first of a three-game home stretch. So we were on the at home first, then on the road. Then we had a three-game road stretch right before Thanksgiving to wrap up our games before then. So first of that three-game home stretch was against uh, you know, uh, another well-rounded team, the Columbus Wizards, and that's the first time we've ever faced them in history. So the first time we faced one of these new teams. There are several new teams we'll be playing throughout the season. Wizards wound up finding themselves on top of that at the end when it was all said and done. 126-114 victory for the Columbus Wizards brought the Instigators to their first loss of the season. Wizards, again, a very, very solid, well-rounded team, and one, that was, a good team and a team that we knew was going to be a difficult matchup. First time we faced off against that opponent, so we didn't play against them last season. So, anytime we play a team for the first time, it's going to be a new challenge to that. But it is a team that we saw have success in the past. So it is a team that we had marked down as a challenging opponent. But we did keep it close. It was a back and forth game. And in the end, the Wizards pulled away in the fourth quarter. That's ultimately what the difference was when it came down to that final score. There is towards the end of the game, the Wizards really pulled themselves out in front. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Instigators wound up leading pretty much the whole game until that fourth quarter, where the Wizards took the lead and added to it. So that was our first loss on the season, brought us to 2-1, dropped us out of those power rankings. And that was the first of our three-game home stretch in November before Thanksgiving. Then we had the next home game, again, Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana, and that was against a familiar opponent, the Ohio Kings. That wound up being a 131-111 victory in favor of the Kings. Our second loss on the season, that dropped us to 2-2, still 500. So not a losing record at this point, but you got to get things righted on the ship at that point. But the Kings, we matched up against them last season, and they had beaten us in all those matchups last season as well. So we knew it was going to be a tough opponent. I believe the Kings wound up finishing first in the Red Division last season, and the Lions were second. But the Kings, led by Cameron Mitchell, one of the leading scorers in the whole ABA. The guy averages like almost 40, 50 something points a game. So that was one of the keys throughout the game. And anytime you face the Kings, that is going to be one of the key factors. We were able to hold him on the lower side for his points in that game. But overall, the Kings as a team came through and had a pretty good showing there with a 131-111 victory. So 20-point margin of victory there. And we play the Kings throughout, I think, one more time throughout the season. But that is a team that we faced off against a few times in the past, and we always know these are tough games against the Kings. So that's another one we've got circled. When it comes back to later in the season, we will play both the Wizards and the Kings again. So we've got those circled on our calendars in, maybe a revenge game, I guess is the word you could use. But those are games where we're looking to, kind of show that we are just up there with those teams as well. And I think anybody can agree. We got that number 16 ranking that the Instigators definitely have the ability and the talent to be a top team, and that was recognized in those power rankings. But like I said, every game is a game. It is a new game, so it's ultimately up to each week going into the game and conquering each of those games. So again, we found ourselves after that game 2-2 on the season, still at 500, not losing record at this point. But the next game is going to be, the turning point. Do we get things back on the right track, go above 500, or is this going to drop us under 500? And, this is, back to that 50-50 where you've got a chance where you can get things back on the right track. And we faced off against our last of that 3-game home stretch, the Peoria Pitbulls. That was a decisive victory for your Hoosier State Instigators, 141-108. And the Pitbulls are a good team. So this was a very impressive victory for your Hoosier State Instigators, pulling themselves up to a 3-2 record. Again, back on the winning track and a winning record on the season. But that is a good Pitbulls team. They beat the Lions, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this season. And the Lions are still in the power rankings, and they're a team that we've seen throughout the past few years, um, that are a perennial playoff contender and a contender for the championship. Winners of the championship not too long ago. In the past, a couple of years ago, actually, they were the co-champions. So Lions are a good team there, and the Pitbulls were able to take them down, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this year. So that is a good team. And a 141-108, that's a pretty large margin of victory for your Hoosier State Instigators. But that is it really got things back on track, and we'll see how that transitions into these next games. But that puts us back in that winning track, back in the winning record. Again, we're still above 500 now. And that leads us into our next game. And I think I still got the graphic here. Yeah, so that game there, the 141-108 victory, we just got to shout this out. This was also something for the record books. We had the tie for the most points in a game, 40 points for Dylan Ware. And apologies for some of the dunks that we missed on the AI camera. It got bumped into throughout that game. But I mean, we still caught a good number of dunks from Dylan Ware throughout that game. So congratulations to him for tying Lawan Whitney at 40 points in a game. That is the tied for the most games in or most points in a single game in Hoosier State Instigators history. So that is very impressive, and something that we'll always be keeping track of. He's also Dylan got his name up there towards the top of that points leaderboard, the all-time scoring book for the Hoosier State Instigators right now. AB is at the top of that list, and then Dylan and Lawan are the other top three overall players when it comes to that. But that was just some of that, you know, uh, the history books for this past game. So that is, just something that definitely deserves a shout out there. So congrats again to Dylan. And the whole team overall had a very impressive game in that matchup. Several players in double digits. Um, but let's jump into the schedule. So tomorrow, we will be playing the same team. We'll be playing the Pitbulls tomorrow night. Again, I believe that's going to be at 4 p.m. Central, which is 5 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be streaming that live from Peoria. And again, that's exclusive to our Patreon subscribers. So anybody in that paid tier on Patreon will have access to those to the game tomorrow, as well as all of our live games throughout the season. Everyone else will have the opportunity to catch these games on YouTube a few days later, once we do upload those videos with some game analysis and commentary. But that is what we got coming up in this week's game. Then we'll wrap up 2024. Like I said, we're coming down in that last month. We are in December now. So we've got the game tomorrow on the road. Then we come back home for a couple more home games before the end of the year. We'll be playing the Legends again, a team that we already faced off earlier this season, and had a victory against. But bragging rights again on the table for the state of Indiana. Will it be Indiana or Hoosier State? Then we've got the big game there. Big game right before the holidays. We will be at home against the Chicago Fury, the defending champions of the ABA, currently the number one ranked team in the ABA power rankings and still undefeated Chicago Fury. That is a major game that I think everyone has had circled throughout this season. Once we announced this schedule here, was the matchups against the Chicago Fury. Then we'll wrap up 2024 on the road against the Columbus Wizards. Again, that'll be a team that we faced off against earlier in the season, but we're looking to get a win against. They got the best of us in that first matchup, so we're looking to get maybe a little bit of revenge in that matchup there on the road. Then we've got the second half of the season there in 2025. But like I said, we got that new promo. If you haven't seen that, we'll throw that in here just for a second, and then we'll jump over to sharing that screen so we can take a look at the breakdown of the games throughout the season within our division and some of the common opponents that we will be playing throughout the season. But we did post that new promo. So again, that's for all of our home games. If you haven't been out to Best Choice Fieldhouse, I highly recommend that. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself onto the stage here to tell you more about that while I pull up the screen here, to share some of the games throughout the season here and the stats. So give me 1 second here, and there we go.
Hey, it's Jakey Muffins here in warm and sunny Florida, but there's no place I'd rather be than at Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana for the next Hoosier State Instigators home game. You can go over to www.apexofsports.com, click on the tickets link at the top of the page, and get your game tickets for our next home game. We have 3 and 5 game packages as well to help save yourself some money. I hope to see you at the next home game, and when you're there, be sure, as always, to be great and instigate.
All right. So, like I said, if you haven't been out to Best Choice Fieldhouse, I definitely highly recommend that. I will be up there for our next home game, so I look forward to that. That is not this week, but next week I will be up for that game against the Legends. So let's jump over to this. I think if I take myself off here, you may be able to see it a little. And I just realized that it takes my audio out too. So I'll stay next to it here. But we've got these the games here. So again, as I mentioned, we are in the Central Black Division this year. We were in the Red Division last season. So let's take a look throughout the season here. So we did start a little bit later than some of the other teams within our division. As we look at that first week matchup there, our first week of matchups there, October 19th and 20th, we did have, there's a new team, the Midwest Monsters, making their debut against the Southland Saints, a team we matched up against last season. The Saints and the Monsters both in the Black Division this year. Saints, we will not have match up against this season, but we will play the Monsters later in the year, or later in next year, I should say. But that is the first game on the season there. 144-73, Southland Saints victory. Followed by, again, more teams here in the division. 135-117 victory. The Chicago Knights over the Wisconsin Frost. And then a tight game there, a 1-point game for Lacrosse Showtime and Windy City Inferno with the Showtime on top. And then, as I mentioned, the Chicago Fury, the defending ABA League champions, took on the Monsters in their first matchup of the season, a 161-73 victory. Again, very decisive victory there. Nearly, that's a 88-point victory, almost a 100-point victory. That's very impressive. But that is that first week of games there. Then our home opener game there, you see there, the 124-106 victory against the Louisville Pros. Then we have on there the Windy City Inferno with a 94-73 victory over the Chicago Rebels. Southland Saints start off the season 2-0 with a 132-131 victory, a close game against the Showtime. Indiana Lions, a team, again, that was in our previous division, taking on a current team in our division, the Wisconsin Frost, with a 173-96 victory, decisively in favor of the Lions. And then another couple of games the next day, another matchup with the Lions and an in-division opponent. They played off against the Monsters with a 132-85 victory for the Lions. And the Saints continued their impressive start to the season, 115-98 win over the Windy City Inferno. Then we jumped into the next week of games. And on Saturday, we had a 114-77 victory of the Lacrosse Showtime over Wisconsin Frost. Chicago Fury continued their undefeated season with a 111-105 victory against the St. Louis Spirits. And one of the odder scores that you will see in an ABA game, both teams under 100 points with an 84-33 victory. The Chicago Rebels over the Midwest Monsters. And again, that's such an odd score. Almost always you're going to see at least one of the teams over 100 points in ABA matchup, and 33 is definitely an interesting number to see on that scorecard as well. And then on Sunday, November 3rd, we had the Fury continuing their undefeated season with a 105-98 victory over the River City Gamblers. Windy City Inferno with a 140-135 victory over Wisconsin Frost. And a reminder, the Instigators with a 145-117 victory over the Indiana Legends on the road. Next week, our third week of games for the Instigators. There were a few games here. Again, that's another odd one, under 100 points for both teams in the ABA. Wisconsin Frost with an 88-81 victory against the Chicago Rebels. Fury with a 118-115 victory, a close game, but still a victory for the Fury against the Windy City Inferno. And then the first loss on the season for your Instigators in that 126-114 matchup against the Columbus Wizards at home for the Instigators. That Sunday, the Saints got their first loss when they matched up against the Indiana Lions in a 104-94 game, 10-point loss there. And then the Ohio Kings faced off against the Naperville Wise Guys with a 192-133 victory. Nearly broke that 200-point mark, which is very impressive for the Ohio Kings. Again, they are a team that is not in our division this season, but a team that we've seen in our division last season. So we will, play some common opponents between the two of us throughout the season, and we match up against them as well. As you see, the next week we did in a 131 to 111 victory for the Kings. Again, second game of that home stretch for your Hoosier State Instigators. Then we've got the Fury, again, continuing their undefeated season there, 154-124 over the Lacrosse Showtime. Then on that Sunday, we had the Southland Saints with an overtime win. I think that's the only overtime game so far on the season within our division against the Wisconsin Frost, 133-127. Then our last game, the week of November 23rd, we had a 141-108 victory against the Peoria Pitbulls. We also saw the Monsters face off against the Rebels. The Rebels with a 106-80 victory. Chicago Fury remained undefeated there with a 134-108 victory over the Indiana Legends. And the Wisconsin Frost with a 1-point victory, 115 to 114 over the Lacrosse Showtime. Then this past week, we saw a couple of matchups there. The Windy City Inferno with a 146-137 victory over the Midwest Monsters, which I will say, I think that's got to be the best outing for the Monsters at this point. That is definitely a close game and their highest scoring game on the season. So shout out to them. A team that's new. This is their first ABA season, clearly improving here as we get in the throughout the season. So props to them. I'm sure they're gonna get things, continue to get things figured out, and they'll have a victory here, in not too long. Then that game there you see with the Dashes, the Fury, and the Saints, they're actually matching up tomorrow, so that'll be a game to keep your eye on. And the Rebels with a 105-86 victory over Showtime. But I do mention again that Fury Southland Saints game, that is a big game going on tomorrow. Those are currently the two top teams within the Central Black Division. Fury undefeated still on the season. Saints, I believe, with one loss so far on their records. And if you keep an eye on those division records, the top four, if I'm not mistaken, the top four teams in the division are the ones that are locked into the playoffs. The other teams will do the play-in games. So we saw how that worked out last season, where we were just short of making it to the top four, where we were the top team in the play-in games. But that is the play-in. So if you make it to the play-ins, you still got to win out those games to make it into the playoffs. A lot easier if you lock yourself in playoffs. But that is where we stand currently. So Fury number 1, Saints number 2, Instigators number 3. And so that'll be a big game earlier in the day on tomorrow. Then we've got the game for us against the Pitbulls, which will be going on the road to play in Peoria. Then we've got a couple of matchups as well tomorrow for some in-division teams. The Windy City Inferno will be traveling to face off the Indiana Lions, and the Midwest Monsters will be heading to Wisconsin to face off the Frost. So those are the games we've got on the books for tomorrow. Again, we'll be doing a live stream for that game with the Hoosier State Instigators when we take on the Peoria Pitbulls on the road. And as I mentioned, we'll take a quick look here. We'll jump back and stop sharing the screen here. Oh, it looks like the camera went out actually. So maybe you saw that. Let's see. Let's jump on to this. See if I can get the camera working again. If not, whatever. But you take a look here at the roster, and we see that. Oh, there we go. Got it fixed. As we see, the game's coming up here. The game tomorrow on the road against the Pitbulls. I mentioned the Fans Man, a vote that we do every week. This week's vote for the Fans Man. Let me pull that up. We had 3 players on that vote as we have here in the past. It was down to Anthony Williams, Caleb Magruder, and Lance Hopkins, a few guys that we've seen on that Fans Man vote throughout the season here. Each one of them have won vote in the season, and they've all made their appearances on the court. And I think they've scored every time one of them has been named a Fans Man. This week, again, we always get a bunch of votes when it comes to that. Deciding the final roster spot this week will be Anthony Williams. So congrats to Ant. Well deserved as always. The fans have spoken, and each week, again, if you want your guy to make that final roster spot, become a fan voter, and you have that vote every week. Or, we do have the opportunity if you are just specifically looking to vote for that Fans Man vote of a specific week, you can also do that. So it's $10 if you're a fan voter per month, or you can pay, I believe it's $3 per vote to vote for your player on that Fans Man vote. So congrats again to Ant. We look forward to seeing you on the court tomorrow. And let's take a look at the roster. So I'll read off the roster for the game against the Pitbulls tomorrow that we had pushed out a couple of days ago. We will have JoJo Hart, Malcolm Martin, Levante Nelson, Lawrence Boyd, Damian Wilburn, Rico Spikes, Chuck Bloom, Dylan Ware, a new signing, Cash, Steve Rogers, and Alex Brown, AB. So familiar for that roster. That's pretty similar to what we have had the past few weeks. Malcolm, if he's back and ready to play, he's had an injury the past few weeks. That'll definitely be a welcome presence back on the court. But that is, we've seen those guys throughout the season here. I think the one guy off that will not be able to make it this week is Joe Bird. So I think that is the one difference I see as far as what we have from the game prior. And then obviously, we've got the new signing. All I've been told is his name is Cash. So even if you look over on the Patreon, you're able to see if you're on the Patreon and you have access to that Fans Man vote, you'll be able to see the roster and then the final players that are being voted on for that spot. So even if you go over on there, that is all the information we have provided on that new signing. It just says Cash. That's all we have. But we'll definitely see that. Welcome signing. Welcome to the team, Cash. And we'll see him in action tomorrow for the first time. So that is something to keep your eye on if you're catching that live game stream or if you're there in person. And if not, when you catch it over on YouTube, when you catch the recap of that game, that's something to watch for. It'll be my first time seeing him on the court. So I look forward to seeing who that is and, how he plays. So that is, I guess, a sneak peek, a tidbit to keep your eye on for this week's matchup. The other thing, we mentioned Dylan had 40 points in the last matchup, and several of our guys had double-digit point games. And I think realistically, the only thing that, we've mentioned this a few times throughout the season, we want to see improved upon. Game to game is always going to be turnovers. So I think that's going to be one of the key stats that we look at as far as, fans and owners when we look at this game compared to last game. And then obviously, we had that significant margin of victory, and the Pitbulls are a pretty good team. I mean, that's something that I know, and I think all of our players know. The Pitbulls are going to come in, really, really aggressive with a chip on their shoulder when we face off against them. And it's going to be at their home venue. So they're going to definitely try to defend their home venue, just as we did with ours. So again, this was one of those matchups I had circled as kind of a turning point in the season. I didn't even realize, and I don't think any of us would have predicted at that point going into that first matchup against the Pitbulls, we'd be 500, 2-2 on the season. We have that victory. Now we're facing the same exact team that we know we can beat, but we have to go into it with the same exact mentality, the same type of mindset, and know that nothing is taken for granted. We have to earn every single game. And if we can continue to do that and improve upon, some of those things that we always want to continue to improve upon is, creating the shot opportunities and taking advantage of the free throws. And it looks like my camera went out again. Apologize for that. But, again, taking advantage of the opportunities we have on hand and limiting the turnovers as much as possible. But again, that 3D rule is really a big thing here within the ABA. When it comes to the turnovers can be extremely costly because of that opportunity with the 3D rule. So that is what we're looking for in tomorrow's game. And again, I think this is one of the key turning points I think we had circled in the season. Then obviously we've got not to skip over the Legends game. I'll be going to that game. I always love to see those games in person. That friendly in-state rivalry. But then the following week we play against the defending champion Chicago Fury, and then we wrap up the year 2024 against the Columbus Wizards. A tough road matchup there against a team that we are looking to, even up the all-time series against. But that will be, how we wrap up 2024. And some of these big games we got circled coming up here for your Hoosier State Instigators. But that's gonna be it for tonight's episode. Thank you as always for joining me on. Let's see if I can get that. I'll try to get that camera fixed real quick again. If not, we'll just work with it for now. But as always, it is. Oh, there we go. You gotta work it at least for this last minute here. As always, if you're a Patreon member, any of those paid tiers, you'll have the opportunity to catch that game live on our game stream. With that AI camera tomorrow when we face off against the Pitbulls, and that again I believe is going to be 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central for tip. And if I'm sure we'll post stuff on social if it's anything different than that, but that is the last I heard in regards to it. Then we've got that home matchup next weekend, so we'll be returning back to Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana. But we will see you all tomorrow on that stream, or we'll catch you next week when we post that stream, post the game recap with commentary, or we'll see you next week for the next week's episode of Instigate Success. Thank you as always for joining me and for being a loyal fan of your Hoosier State Instigators. We truly appreciate all of the support from every single one of you, all of our fans, and all of our sponsors. Thank you again, as always, for being behind us and helping, create what we have today here with your Hoosier State Instigators. But reminder, game tomorrow against the Pitbulls on the road in Peoria, and we look forward to that. And until next week's episode, thank you for joining me on episode 69 of Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise. As always, be great and instigate